It was a momentous day in Parliament. If you missed it, let me sum it up for you. There was a lot that was expected today in the House. And, well, the Speaker came up with a decision that, to all intents and purposes, had calmed a few nerves. But has it really? What really happened? Of course, a lot was riding on what he would have said today, on the back of the decision that he himself triggered, announcing that 4 seats in the House have been vacated. But when he showed up today, and we were looking at how he will react to the Supreme Court's own ruling on the subject that effectively stayed his hand on the particular matter, he says he's adjourning the House indefinitely. And that doesn't really satisfy any side of the House, either the MPP or the minority side, but does a neutral maneuvering out of a complex quagmire that, in fact, the Parliament itself was placed in, placing the judiciary firmly against the legislature. So that was his announcement today. So if you're just coming to this conversation, Parliament has been adjourned indefinitely. And nobody knows what is going to trigger a recall of Parliament, because the Speaker did not quite say if this is going to be determined after the outcome of the Supreme Court ruling or by some other factor. But one of the things that we learned tonight, even speaking to the two sides of the House in terms of leadership, those who were in conclave with him before he came out to make this announcement, is that he says he wants to consult a bit more, because there are individuals in society, statesmen, eminent people he needs to consult, because of this democracy was pushed to a brink of a constitutional crisis. We need to pull back, and so he wants to have a conversation, and that may determine, once he's done, that will determine if he then decides to recall Parliament. But we know also tonight that the minority side are already beginning to gather signatures to compel him to recall Parliament, because he can do that under the Constitution. Once you gather more than 41 votes, you can compel him to recall Parliament. He has no say in the matter once the signatures have been accumulated. We understand that's something that the NPP side is currently doing to get him to recall Parliament. And so we keep an eye on that. And we know that this really is the background to what has happened. He also confirmed today that he indeed received the ruling from the Supreme Court. And many had said in the past that, well, they didn't know about, some MPs on the NDC side have said they didn't know about the Supreme Court's ruling, and so the Speaker is not bound by it. But today, he acknowledged that he has been served, and the Supreme Court was clear in that particular ruling that those 4 MPs must be allowed to represent the people that indeed came to Parliament to represent on the back of the 2020 elections. Also tonight, another thing that has happened, another development in this man here is the Attorney General. And the Attorney General has also gone to the court, because, you know, he was part of the suit, by the way, as a defendant in the particular matter, after the majority leader, Alexander Fenyo-Markin, rushed to the court to try and stop the Speaker from declaring those 4 seats vacant. Now, in that particular matter, the Attorney General has filed his own case in the matter, and he says a few things. He's challenging the Speaker's declaration, declaring those 4 seats vacant, and he makes a few points. But primary among the points he makes in the statement of case before the Supreme Court is that when that constitutional provision, 97, talks about vacating your seat, if you decide to, in the case as we have it, you are on a political party's ticket in Parliament, and then you decide to go independent, well, and you want to remain in the House, his interpretation of that is that remain in the House does not apply to the current life and term of this Parliament. It is still a future Parliament that is yet to be, and so you cannot apply what is yet to come to this particular life of the Parliament. And his point is that it doesn't affect them in this Parliament, and so their seats cannot be vacated, although it is a matter of fact that these 4 MPs, in fact, 3 of them, 2 on the side of the MPP, 1 on the side of the NDC, have decided to run as independent. That's fundamentally one of the key points that the Attorney General is making. And here are these MPs in question, and all of them, as we know, have gone, 2 of them have gone independent, including him. His case, I haven't heard much about, because I believe it's open and shut, because he came in as an independent. And the Constitution is clear, if you come in as an independent and you decide to run on the ticket of another political party, that automatically means you vacated your seat, right? And we'll see how that plays out. But there's another thing that has come up tonight, that some, in fact, in her case, she has had to issue a statement to deny that categorically, because it has been suggested that she may have changed her mind, rescinded her decision to go independent, even after she's filed and picked up forms and the EC has accepted her nomination forms and she is now formally an independent candidate. It has been suggested that on the back of all the controversy and the party reaching out to her, she's decided to sort of backtrack. She has come out categorically to say that isn't true, and she's still running as an independent candidate in that same constituency, this time as an independent candidate. So clearly there's a lot happening, you can imagine, in the MPP to try and get these two to back off if they do matter close, because then they will still have their members in the House. That means they will have the numbers, and this controversy will currently be dealt with quite emphatically. But this is a constitutional provision in question that it has now been at the center of interpretation of the Supreme Court. First of all, if you come to Parliament in Party A, on the ticket of Party A, and then you decide to then move to Party B, Constitution says you should vacate your seat. Second, if you go independent, whilst you had come in as on the ticket of Party A, the Constitution again says you must vacate your seat. Then the second bit there is that if you came in as an independent, as in the case of the former MP, and then you decide then to cross to Party A or Party B, that isn't the reason why your people elected you. Parliamentary, protecting the sanctity of parliamentary representation, right? And so the Constitution again says you vacate your seat. So these are the various scenarios, and at least those two, and this is not all, there are others, but those two that are in question and become a subject of some significant controversy, the Supreme Court will interpret these two when they sit on the substantive matter before them. But there are other provisions in there that, of course, also talks about parties merging at the top and the Constitution deciding that that's what they want to do. The Constitution says it doesn't affect the MPs in question. 3 major decisions in 6 days. First one to note, Speaker declaring those 4 seats vacant. And then the other key one that then followed shortly after that, 24 hours later, it is the Supreme Court stay of execution. And that is really what set us up for this possible constitutional crisis that I believe have been averted, or have it really? My guests will weigh in on that when they sit for a conversation pretty shortly. The Speaker now, having been compelled to adjourn by his own words because of the questions around the composition and constitution of Parliament, he wants to adjourn this indefinitely, buy him some time to consult more broadly, and then possibly recall Parliament. The big decision, though, and this is the question mark that we need to look at, when is that Supreme Court final determination going to be? I don't know, but this indefinite adjournment, considering that you have 46 days to an election, can drag on because nobody really knows when it's going to end. But as you know, the key question that came up today when the Speaker sat, and one of the reasons he cited for adjourning the House indefinitely, is that when the House sat today, the minority side, as in the NDC side, had taken the majority seats, right? And the other side was empty. But the Speaker was clear that quorum, yes, there was quorum, because you only need 92 MPs in the House for the business of Parliament to proceed. However, you need far more if you want to take binding decisions. At least you need 138 MPs. And the question you need to ask yourself is, does the NDC side have 38 MPs? They do not. And so the Speaker says, well, we don't have a decision-making quorum. But I've heard also tonight that the reason why the Speaker said it is not because of this constitutional provision necessarily, but because the NDC themselves failed to bring the entire 136 members, minus the individual who has vacated his seat, to the floor. Because if you vacate those 4 seats, half of that number will be dividing 271 by 2. That brings you to 136, and they should have that. They should have that. But they didn't bring all of them to the House, and so they couldn't take decisions today. and they wanted to take a few decisions, including the election of the second Deputy Speaker of Parliament, the repeal of the e-levy, etc. And so the Speaker, that is the explanation I've heard from Roxanne Nafiamekpo, and that is why the Speaker, knowing the numbers, make this announcement. We'll see. A lot of this will be very clear as we proceed and approach the Supreme Court verdict. But a few big government business will be affected. One of them, obviously, is the approval of the 2025 budget that we know should come in November. You also see the revocation of this controversial airline, which is a subject of some significant controversy. As far as the Galamsey fight is concerned, it will also suffer. Remember, it is one of the reasons why Organized Labour decided to backtrack and pull back from a nationwide strike. That is going to obviously suffer because government has a perfect excuse anyway. Nothing happens, you can't blame us because Parliament is indefinitely suspended. That is going to suffer. Another key business that will suffer is 275 million that the government wanted approval for, that financial stability fund. This is key. It could have implications for this economy. We know that's a key point that will also suffer. And then we also know the approval of the 350 million tax waiver the government has been fighting for a long, long time. The trade minister in particular will also not happen because of this gridlock that we are talking about tonight. Nobody knows when Parliament is going to return, but even if it returns, with few days or weeks to an election, you can see every single thing will be contested, even if Parliament resumes on this particular matter. And then a big one. 2 Supreme Court justices have been nominated. Parliament will have to consider that. They too have been caught in this gridlock. They will also suffer. Their nominations may not even be considered. If this life, the Parliament's life expires, they will have to come afresh. Another president will have to consider whether the name should go back. And so this is desperate if indeed you are those 2 Supreme Court justices who have worked very hard and earned it for no fault of theirs. They will have to be kept in limbo. So a few key things that goes to the question, why is this fight over minority-majority important? Because if you get a majority, the NDC side gets a majority, they will do a few things. E-levy, they say they would scrap it. Betting tax, they'll remove it also. And so for the government, these are big handles in terms of bringing in revenue, especially if you're on an IMF program. So they need that, right? And that is why this is key. My guest is joining me for a conversation. Quick, brisk reactions to what has happened today, just to give you a snapshot of what you should know going into tomorrow, because it's going to be a biggest conversation. We're starting tonight. Stay with me here on PM Express. PMS is always brought to you by Syntex Sans. It is strong, it is tough. Also brought to you by Academic Times newspaper. This is a show that gives you a sense of what has happened in the course of the day. And by the way, I want to bring in my guests who are joining me right now on the phone. We're joined right now by Asa Sante. He is the former head of the Ghana Law School. Joins us. Dr. Tony Udu will also join us. Is a former head of the Policy and Evaluation and Oversight Unit of the Office of the President. Kukwasa Sari, as I said, is the former director of the Ghana School of Law. Haruna Drusu, who also joined us, is a former minority leader and MP for Tamale South. Will join us too with his thoughts pretty shortly. We have Dr. Tony Udu on the line. And Asari is with me right now on the line. Mr. Asari, thank you for your time here on PM Express. What's your reaction to what happened today?
It was predictable, so I wasn't. If they are done the opposite. So we thank God that at least right speaker did the right thing. Adjourns.
Sorry, I'm struggling to hear you. Hopefully the line can be fixed. But can you hear me, sir?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, great. Yeah. You say it was predictable at the beginning, but was it really? Because
you recall that last Thursday and Friday, when I appeared on your show. I did say that what the Supreme Court did constituted as we're heading for a showdown in Parliament, 3 days. That's exactly, what occurred today. So I wasn't surprised. But let's thank the MP at least not doing anything untoward, because the whole world is watching. For me,
I'm sorry, we're having breaks. We're having breaks in the line, making it difficult for me to follow. We're going to try and connect with you again. Hopefully, we can get you on a better connection. I want to bring in, apologies there, I want to bring in Dr. Tony Edu, who is joining me, former head of policy for the NDC. Dr. Edu, you watch what unfolded today, and I've heard you already make the point that the Supreme Court overreached in that ruling. The Speaker acknowledged it today, and then he has adjourned the House indefinitely. Your reaction?
The Speaker did not acknowledge the Supreme Court ruling. He said he's been notified of the Supreme Court's ruling.
But that's acknowledging.
Now,
that's acknowledging.
Hello?
It. That is acknowledging it.
Yes, but he did not acknowledge the legality of the Supreme Court's ruling. That's why they went to file papers at the Supreme Court today. But what has happened is that the Attorney General, I understand, has filed for the proper interpretation of Article 97. This is the proper application to the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. What happened with the majority or minority leader, Anthony Markin or whatever, amounted to just an interference in the parliamentary proceedings. Now they are asking for interpretation of the article, which is within the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. But it must be noted that the Supreme Court must adopt a purposive interpretation. What was in the minds of those who framed that provision? The Supreme Court cannot construe the interpretation. If it construes, it is going out of its jurisdiction. There is a reference point for purposive interpretation, and that is to the Hansard of the Consultative Assembly that debated the provision. Then you will know what was the intention of those who framed the constitutional provisions.
Yeah, I mean, we'll come to the substance of whether or not the Supreme Court should adopt the interpretation approach they should adopt. But on the substance of what happened today, when the Speaker told us today that he has been served, and then he goes ahead to read to us what the ruling says in greater detail. To sum up, he's read to us that the Supreme Court said those 4 seats, the MPs must be allowed, they cannot be denied representation of their people.
He said according to the ruling.
According to the ruling, yes. So he was telling us what it was.
Of the Supreme Court. But did he say he accepted? He didn't say he accepted.
He didn't need to say that, did he? Because he has been served.
No, he needed.
With the ruling of a Supreme Court from a court of competent jurisdiction, that, as we speak, is the order of the day.
The court of competent jurisdiction cannot overstep the boundaries of its legality to go and interfere with parliamentary proceedings. The Supreme Court's jurisdiction does not lie with interference with parliamentary proceedings.
Well, the Speaker himself, and the Speaker has held the position you're expressing right now in previous instances. He did not make a pronouncement on that particular matter today because that, he knows, will be triggering a constitutional crisis.
Well, then the Speaker was wise then. In which case, as he said the first day before the motion was moved in Parliament, if you sow evil, you reap evil. The MPP has sown evil and they are reaping evil. Now I understand they they are calling for a resumption of Parliament.
Do you support the Speaker's decision to adjourn the House indefinitely, knowing the circumstances?
Yes.
Why?
Because what the MPP did was to suspend the Speaker's application of the standing orders by which the Constitution declares automatically that the seats are vacant.
Dr. Tonedu, stay with me. I want to bring in a former minority leader, Harun Edrisu. He raised this first out of Parliament, but we know that the case after forcing formally brought to the attention of the Speaker, which really triggered this chain of events. Thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Idrisu. Give me your reaction to what happened today in the House.
The Speaker of Parliament indicated that he has been served by a ruling of the Supreme Court to stay execution, and therefore he had earlier ruled to declare the 4 seats vacant, pursuant to the issue which was raised by the minority leader that the 2 MPs were in breach of the Constitution and were deemed to have vacated their seats pursuant to Article 97(1)(g) and 8 of the United States. In Ghana, as rightly pointed out by the news group, we opted for the request that three co-equal organs state must respect each other and the mandate and authority of the other. The Supreme Court, to the extent that Parliament passes a law that is inconsistent with the Constitution, they are clothed with a mandate to strike it out. But in this particular instance, Evans, read the text of Article 97(1)(g) and H well. And the first rule of interpretation is that give words their ordinary common sense meaning. When the ordinary common sense meaning leads to absurdity, then you can look for their secondary meaning. There is no ambiguity whatsoever with the provisions of Article 97(1)(g) and H. And even more importantly, Professor Michael Kwe had led the way in 2020 when the Honorable Esiama opted out of the New Patriotic Party to run on the ticket of as an independent candidate. The seat was declared vacant. What is different? Has the MPP constitution changed since 2020? Has that particular provision changed? No. So, in one breath, when it suits them, it serves them. When it does not suit them, it's wrong law. You now have 2 members or 3 members of the New Patriotic Party. Don't forget, I've heard people say that some candidates are opting out. It does not resolve the issue. I think it's important that the Supreme Court, if their mandate is being invoked to interpret the Constitution for which they have a mandate, to timely and conclusively interpret Article 97(1)(g)(h) to resolve this political constitutional tussle and for the governance of our country to proceed. But judicial interference in the work of Parliament, we regulate our own proceedings. And once the seats were declared vacant, you expected that on the basis of the numbers, the composition of Parliament will change, its leadership will change, chairmanship and ranking of committees will change automatically. I've heard them say that some 2 MPP members who hitherto decided to go independent are changing their mind.
Yeah, one of them has
The
tonight
prin-
issued a statement to say that isn't true. I mean, in the case
And
of Senator Morrison.
even the principle of automaticity catches up with them. It does not save them from the requirement of the Constitution to vacate. Indeed, in my view, it is not even for the Speaker to declare the seats vacant. The seats are vacant. The words read, a member of Parliament shall vacate his seat, a member. So the onus and burden is on that member of Parliament to vacate his seat. It is not even for the Speaker to declare it vacant. It is deemed vacant. Once you swear an oath, and all of them before filing nominations subscribe to an oath that they were now contesting elections as independent candidates, which depart from the party which elected them into Parliament, because you want to avoid defection, which undermines our democracy. So I think that the Supreme Court, by their ruling, together with the actions of the executive and the majority leader, is undermining Ghana's democracy.
And that will be a subject to
We
the
could
Supreme
have
Court
made some
verdict. I want your quick view on this.
Precedent.
Yeah, I want a quick view on this on the back of what happened today. There's still, your side still believe you are the majority now. But on the back of what you acknowledged, that the Speaker himself acknowledged, that he has received the ruling, that rules out any aspirations of you being the majority.
No, Evans, chronology of events is important. At the time that the Speaker declared those seats vacant, that interaction, that period, the NDC was the majority party until the Supreme Court took that contrary decision.
So as we speak tonight, you're not the majority, you are in a minority.
Which decision was only conveyed to Parliament today, which the Speaker approved. But I said, it does not change things. We need to resolve the puzzle. I respect the authority of the judiciary, but I am not for judicial interference. In any case, Ghanaians must be asking questions about the predictability of our judiciary.
But I need clarity.
Evan, let me make my point.
Yeah.
How come that just on Friday?
Yeah, I'll come to that substantively. I'll come to that. I'll come to the Supreme Court because it's important. And as we know, a case has been filed. But I want
Is that what happens on a normal day?
Yeah, Mr. Idrissa, we'll come to the Supreme Court issues.
With the matter to save the country and save our democracy.
Yeah, I mean, we'll come to that. And I will ask you quickly to give me your thoughts on it. But I need to clarify a point you made for me. Today, because the Speaker has been served, this puts this matter of who is majority to rest, does it not? Okay, I believe we lost him there. And when he joins me, because he is obviously a leading member of the party in the House, you give me his thoughts on that. But also today, I want him to confirm a bit on the Supreme Court part of this, because the suggestion of the morning was that the Speaker himself is asking his lawyers to file their own processes in court, and part of the thing they wanted to do was to set aside the Supreme Court's ruling on this particular matter. I wanted to ask him if he knows, if he can confirm that has happened. But I believe I still have with me Tony Yodu on this particular subject. Mr. Yodu, the bigger point, though, today, on the back of the back and forth that has happened, is the indefinite adjournment of the House. Nobody knows when Parliament is going to resume. The Speaker himself didn't give us clarity on what would trigger a recall. As we've heard tonight, the minority side, the MPP side, are collecting signatures to compel him to do so. It has also been explained to us by the NPP side that he had said in the meeting that he wanted to consult broadly. Should the resumption of Parliament, recall of Parliament, be hinged on a final determination of the matter by the Supreme Court?
Yes. The Supreme Court is now holding the hot potato. It cooked the potato and it is holding it. And the only way to cool it is to interpret Article 97 for the peaceful governance of this country. Like Haruna said, Article 97 is clear. The language and spirit are clear, so that if you want to do an interpretation, then you must do a purposive interpretation. And that is to the reference of the Hansard of the Consultative Assembly, to know what were the intention of the framers of that provision. You cannot sit in your chamber and construe the true meaning of Article 97. You cannot do an interpretation by mere construction. Evans.
Yes. So by mere construction, you say that now you obviously have a position different from the Supreme Court's view. The right place to do this, obviously, is to go back to the Supreme Court, and you expect that to see in the Speaker's own case, because he's attached to this, to challenge
not
this
the Speaker. Not the Speaker. The Attorney General has filed application for interpretation.
Yes.
It has brought into focus the real interpretive jurisdiction of the Supreme Court.
I make that point because the Speaker himself in Parliament, he's a defendant in the matter.
Yes, he's defending because he's asking for a certiorari, a question order of the Supreme Court order, which is illegal.
So you've seen...
It is a procedural error of illegality. What the Supreme Court did was the procedural error of illegality. So it should be struck out.
You've seen the Speaker's process.
What is important is the Attorney General's application, which calls for the proper exercise of the Supreme Court's jurisdiction. That's why I said the Supreme Court is now holding the hot potato.
You've seen the process filed by the Speaker?
I haven't seen it. I've heard it.
Okay. And you referenced the Attorney General, though. I've seen the statement of case he's put in. He is making the point that the Speaker got it wrong. And of course, he's invited the Supreme Court to interpret it to mean that that expression of those three MPs in particular who had gone independent, it is for a future Parliament and not in this life. And so you cannot apply the vacancy to them.
How can you construe a futuristic application of a constitutional provision? It's absurd to say that the effect of the provision will be in the next Parliament. What is the relationship of the candidates to the next Parliament? It's not even determined. It's not determined by anybody except the electorate. Suppose they don't win. What happens?
When you say, as if they don't win, as in the MPs in question here?
Yes. That makes the whole question of futuristic interpretation of the provision very, very absurd. And you cannot consider constitutional provisions absurd. There's nothing wrong with our Constitution. What is wrong is that perhaps when we formulated the provisions, we had too much good faith. We believed that no president will come to power and behave like a tyrant. That was our misplaced conception of human nature. Now we've learned a lesson.
Yeah, the Attorney General says, quote, filing nominations to contest an upcoming elections for a place in a future Parliament does not lead to a vacation of a seat in this particular life of Parliament.
Then why was he prosecuting Jackie Kwesi when he filed the nomination? Why is he pursuing him for criminal this thing?
Sorry?
Like Haruna said, the law must be predictable. Otherwise, there is no law. Legal rules and decisions must be predictable so that the ordinary person knows that these principles will be applied given the same circumstances. What are we doing? This cat and mouse game? How can the Supreme Court turn itself into a political arena? It is the last bastion of defense of the Constitution. It must realize that. And it shouldn't put itself as a hatchet agent. It is not pursuing the interests of a regime. It stands to defend the Constitution of this country.
And I wonder, how should the NDC side in Parliament act now, considering that this controversy over majority and minority is still playing out? If Parliament is recalled, how do you expect them to act?
They should go to Parliament and form the majority and move business. If the government wants to do business, it can come to Parliament. It is about time the MPP caucus climbed down from its high horse and realized that politics should not be played in terms of a zero-sum mentality. It should be a positive-sum mentality. If they have a positive-sum mentality, then they will negotiate. Negotiation is part of politics.
But what you propose is anarchy. If they go and say they want to take the majority side, when we know
how can it be anarchy?
When the Supreme Court had said that the 4 MPs must be allowed to take their positions and represent their
by overstepping its boundaries, its jurisdictional boundaries.
Yeah, but until you step that aside, it's the law of the land.
So it is going to be set aside. If it doesn't set aside, and it wants to interpret the provisions of the Constitution like I keep insisting, it must do so with a purposive interpretation. And the purposive interpretation should not be an armchair construction. It should be by reference to the Hansard of the Consultative Assembly.
You make the point, but it's still the domain of the Supreme Court to render that interpretation. And they can render it and use whatever approach they deem fair. But that should not stop.
No, you cannot use an approach that is absurd, that borders on absurdity. The Supreme Court has a duty. It has to stay loyal to the Constitution. It is not a supra, as I have said the whole day, it is not a supra-constitutional body. It is itself a creation of the Constitution. It has a duty to perform. And the duty to perform is not for the benefit of a regime, but for the Constitution itself, for the people of Ghana. So you better stop this jingoistic attitude of singing safari, moving from left to right, inconsistent decisions, contradictory decisions. How? How did we get here? How did Ghana's Fourth Republic descend to the gutters like this?
But this is what democracies do. This is what democracies do. You have to abide by the decisions of the Supreme Court.
Democracy shouldn't do that. The British democracy has been functioning. America was functioning until another tyrant.
Well, you make that point.
To power.
But you have to go through these moments of contention before you get clarity over some of these issues that divide us, such as we are now talking about.
You must keep the integrity of your commitment to constitutional governance. You must. You mustn't make rulings that are politically convenient. Stay true to the law.
This has been adjourned indefinitely. Who loses more? Government?
The government loses. Because there's no reason why the government cannot go to Parliament to conduct business. You can. You can have your bills passed easily if you adopt an attitude of compromise and cooperation rather than behaving like you are Jingo himself.
And just finally, I know you know the speaker very well. Give me your assessment of how he's conducted himself over the period, including today.
Very diplomatically.
Should he be diplomatic, though?
Well, he's a referee. He is not a member of Parliament. He's a referee, and he's doing what referees do.
We heard from the MPP group today, their leader, Fanya Markin, who says in conclave, before they came out. The Speaker acknowledged him as the majority leader, and the Speaker also said that he needs to go and consult a bit more. He seemed to hinge his recall of Parliament on the completion of that recall. You believe that's the approach to take? Consult?
Afenia Markin's statement is a matter of privacy between him and the Speaker. I don't have to believe it. This is a man who only recently made a Freudian slip of his fascist leanings. Did you hear him when he was chastising the Joy FM journalist? He said, I'm making my far-right protest. Far-right protest. Fascist.
Dr. Tony, thank you very much. And Dr. Tony, is the former head of policy for the NDC, giving us his perspective on this controversial day indeed. If you're just joining us, I'm pretty sure you may have heard what happened in the House today in Parliament. It has been adjourned indefinitely. Nobody knows when Parliament is going to come. Tony says it should hinge on the decision of Parliament, decision of the Supreme Court, and that should trigger a recall. We had at the beginning Kweku Ansari, the former director of the Ghana School of Law, and joins us again right now. Apologies that we lost you earlier. We've travailed quite a bit with the Harun Edrisu, but also Dr. Tony Edu. Looking at it strictly from the point of law, the Speaker, having acknowledged that he's been served, adjourns indefinitely. The matter presumably should go back to the Supreme Court for determination. Where do you stand on how long Parliament should be adjourned for? Should it be hinged on, the determination by the Supreme Court that should trigger a recall after that, or Parliament should simply proceed and do business as we await the outcome of the Supreme Court?
I think that given time constraints, this matter left to lead that out. It cannot be resolved in the court of law. It cannot. It can only be resolved by the party in Parliament. For me, there is no issue of interpretation. There is no issue. What are saying is in the statement seems to me to be a red herring. Now, the Attorney General is also the minister of a politician. So he will go along with the sentiments and party. Period. But, my brother, in law, every word is capable of several meanings. No one word in law has a concise meaning. It does not therefore mean that just because a word in law is capable of two or more meanings, therefore there's always an issue of interpretation. That is not the color of the law. That is not what the law says. Now, if you look at Article 97, 97.1 says a member of Parliament shall participate in Parliament based upon the dissolution of Parliament. Is it this Parliament, or yesterday's Parliament, or a future Parliament? By parity of reasoning, are we not suggesting that even Article 97.1a is open interpretation? It is not every provision that lends itself to judicial interpretation. And this problem has been caused by the Supreme Court. And on Thursday, when the Supreme Court made the pronouncement, I was among the first people to say they should be respected in order for us to uphold the rule of law. But that does not mean that if what they did was wrong, the court it shouldn't be pointed out to them. What they did was wrong. There was nothing to interpret in the first place. Secondly, they got it all wrong. The jurisdiction or the court had not been properly invoked. The parties cannot be served as of the time that they supported to hear the application. Thirdly, they exceeded their jurisdiction when they granted much more than what the applicant sought. So, having created a problem, we now have to allow cool-headedness, level-headedness, wisdom, maturity, to resolve this matter. The way we are going about this issue is not going to solve the problem. The Speaker has spoken. Speaker acted in accordance with the tenets of the Constitution. If he got it wrong, he did it, within, the internal mechanisms and procedure of Parliament. Now that we have a problem, as for me, to be honest with you, I don't see this Parliament, sleeping for more than 3 days. But by Friday, next Monday, they'll be back. Business as usual. The leadership of the two houses must meet. The NPP must not give the impression that each time that they get it wrong, then they will walk out and expect the court. They are running from court to court, always going to the Supreme Court, from one panel to another panel, instead of political victory. That is not good. That does not order well for the nation.
Well, the lawyer that I'm pretty sure the lawyer that you are will say to another when he makes the point and you're running to court is that is your constitutional right to actually pursue that.
I mean, the court have even giving their stance on this matter, that no litigant should run from one other court instead of a favorable ruling, just like the NPP is taking to do. You see, if NPP does it, they will tell them. If Chairman Party does it, they will tell it. If Party has said it, let us
Well, Mr. Sassari, unfortunately, the line isn't helping, but I'm grateful that you joined us, former director of Ghana School of Law. We'll see. The key question then becomes, when is Parliament returning from this indefinite adjournment? We'll know more tomorrow as we learn that the MPP side is already beginning to collect signatures to trigger that constitutional provision that will compel the Speaker to recall it. Enjoy the rest of your evening.